Hello Internet, I'm Zahn, and welcome back to another art-related video. Now I know it's probably been a considerable amount of time since I posted an actual drawing commentary type video. I believe the last one I posted would have been the retrospective, which was more of a discussion piece as opposed to an actual commentary video. If you're new to the channel and the work that I do outside of the Let's Plays and the speed drawing videos, what I've done in the past is done what I call live commentary sessions while I'm actually drawing my designs, and use that opportunity to talk through the whole design process and a little bit about what goes into the whole conceptualization, to use a fancy word, whenever I'm working on my two-dimensional designs. Things like the rhino drawings generally lend themselves pretty well to that kind of commentary. But for this session today, I thought I would do something a little bit different. First and foremost, another part of the work that I do outside of the physical art stuff, the Let's Plays, the 2D designs in Rhino, I've also started working on sprite design. So that's probably been over the last year and a half or so, trying to learn how to draw things using pixels, so like video game 8 or 16-bit sprites. Pixel type designs, or Pixel Sprites is what I've called them for the work I do. But to date, I've never actually done a video explaining what that process looks like. I have done numerous drawings on stream, so folks that tune in there can see what the drawing process looks like from start to finish. It's probably not quite as complicated as the Rhino drawings, but as far as doing a live commentary version and talking through the whole process when I do those, I haven't done that yet. And I figured this particular video would be a good opportunity to give that a try and also try a different twist on the whole process, so it's a little bit more interesting. And first off, to explain the window that you're seeing now, I do my sprite designs in Photoshop, and I understand, to most people noticing, this is an ancient version of Photoshop I'm using. This computer is using an older OS due to the limitations of the Rhino software, and I haven't bothered to upgrade to the Creative Cloud and the current versions of Photoshop. One, because I don't really need to for the type of things I use Photoshop for, and also I just don't really have it in my budget for now, but eventually when I get a more up-to-date build and more up-to-date software for everything else, I'll probably jump over to the Creative Cloud to update my version of Photoshop to something a bit more current. But for now, this version works fine. And the window that I've got here pulled up is the main active window whenever I'm doing my sprite work. And as you can see, hopefully the capture is picking this up, the canvas is set up like a grid at the pixel level, and the resolution for this particular image and the base canvas size I use for my sprites is 120 by 120. That's somewhat small, but I want to, sort of as I practice and get used to drawing sprite type designs, work at a manageable size, and then as I get more comfortable and better at it, I'll probably start working with bigger canvases to make larger scale sprites. And real quick, to go through the basic UI stuff that I use for this particular sprite work, and as a disclaimer, I'm not an expert on Photoshop. I sort of self-taught myself the basics over the last decade or so as I've been using it, trying to figure out how to make it do whatever it is I need to do. I am not really that well versed in the more advanced commands, so unless it's something I actively need for whatever I'm working on, I'll mostly just adapt Photoshop to serve my needs. But real quick, to go through some basics before I get into the nature of this video here. Working at this level, the way I start working on my sprites is I'll rough in a primary using the pencil tool, since it allows me to do that at the pixel level. I the sprites that I draw have black outlines. I know some people that are a lot more skilled at pixel art don't necessarily do black outlines for their sprites. They do a lot more shading and blending with the colors and paletting. I am not that advanced when it comes to this stuff yet, so to do a quick example, when I draw a sprite, I will rough in the primary shapes for it using the black outline. I'll add whatever details, and then sort of fill in what I need to fill in, and then once I have the outline set, I'll go in and clean it up to sort of thin out the boundaries and get rid of duplicate pixel parts, and that can take quite a bit of time, so I'm not going to go through that here since we'll be seeing it later. But for sake of just demonstration purposes, the eraser tool I use is also at the pixel level. Then when I go in to do the cleanup around the perimeter, I will delete all of the extra overflow sections so that the outline's more clean. And just to give you an example of what that looks like, that can take a while just because depending on how big the sprite is, I may have to go back and clean up a lot of sections. Once that's done, I'm just going to work on the same layer here for the sake of explanation. Once that's done, I will take the paint bucket tool and I will go in and start assigning colors to the base sprite. Usually, I'll start at whatever part makes sense. It doesn't necessarily matter. I'll rough in all of the different sections, and then once the color palette's been set, I will go one layer up and do the shading, which is my favorite part of the whole process because it lends itself well to a lot of experimenting and just playing around with different shades. But I'll go in and I'm working on the same layer as the outline, which is why it's coloring over the outline. Normally I wouldn't do that, but just for the sake of showing what I'm talking about here. Adding the shading in on the design, giving the highlights where I need to. If I need to go in and add something like highlights on the eyes, then I'll do that on the shading layer. And basically just rinse and repeat until the entire design is done. Compared to the 2D designs, the sprite process is not necessarily as drawn out and complicated. Again, like I mentioned before, it sort of just depends on how complex the idea and design is. Obviously, the bigger, more intricate looking sprite, the longer the cleanup takes, the longer the paletting takes, the longer the shading takes. So what we'll do in this video, and depending on how long it is, I'll probably break this up into several episodes if this ends up being a lengthy video. I'll take the opportunity to talk through the process in real time, and we'll be working on some stuff that's going to be a little bit interesting, I think. But before I move on into explaining how this is going to work, since some people have asked me before on stream and via messages, normally when I'm working on my Rhino designs, the majority of the work I do, I am using my mouse. For the sprites, I started off doing that, and like I mentioned in the design retrospective, before I got Photoshop set up to do this effectively, I was working on these in Paint, in Microsoft Paint, and that was really tedious. I tried using a mouse to do the basic outlining and everything else, and the shading, and it was just very cumbersome and inefficient. Once I moved over to Photoshop, things got a lot more streamlined as far as the commands and the abilities using the software, especially with things like layers. But to answer people's question about how I do the sprites, I'm actually doing these on a tablet. I have a tablet hooked up to my computer so I can actually just draw directly on it. And as far as what kind of tablet, many years ago, I had saved up my money and bought a Cintiq by Wacom. This one is a 21. I don't know what their max size they're up to now is, probably 24 or 27. But a Cintiq is, one, very expensive. This is the most expensive piece of hardware I own, actually. It's basically a dual-purpose monitor / drawing tablet. And normally this is my primary monitor. Now maybe I'll take a picture of my work setup at some point. But on my desk, my main monitor is the Cintiq. And when I want to do things like this, I can flip it down from its standing easel position and actually draw directly on it. So in the capture, when you see me drawing stuff like this on your screen that you can see, this is me drawing on the screen of the actual monitor itself. It's very handy for doing stuff like this because years back, I bought a regular tablet that you plug in via USB, and then it's a surface you put on your desk and you draw on it. But because I wasn't drawing on the actual working surface and trying to look down at what I was drawing and look up and match on the screen, it drove me nuts and it didn't work out. So I told myself, at some point I'm going to save up my pennies for a while and get a Cintiq. So that's what I did. It took a long time and it was very expensive, but I've been using this thing for other related stuff for a while. And the sprites have been a great way to reincorporate that. I tried using the Cintiq for Rhino stuff, but because I'd been doing the mouse work for it for almost a decade at the time, it wasn't really that efficient to try and relearn how to do it via a tablet. A lot of the commands I could have used, but it was still more efficient to do a mouse and keyboard for Rhino. But then for this stuff, the working surface was a lot more handy for stuff like the sprite work. And I just wanted to mention that in case anyone was curious. Okay, so back to the project here. What we're going to do today is I'm going to work through several sprite designs from start to finish. I will do that however many I do in the video. It's kind of going to depend on how long they take. But in order to throw a little bit of a switch into the formula, instead of doing a scratch design just from nothing, free drawing like I've done in some of my other commentary videos, what I'm going to do is give myself some requirements. And what I'm sort of calling this project unofficially is the Fusion Sprite Challenge. Now, I see a lot of artists that I follow online do all sorts of drawing challenges, and I thought I'd give it a try since I haven't done one personally in any aspect of my work. But what we're going to do, I'm going to switch windows here. I have this random list generator off of randomlists.com. This thing will pull through a bunch of random numbers and it will pull up random animals. What I'm going to do for this project, this experiment, is have the randomizer pull 2 animals, and then I'm going to try and create a sprite out of the 2 animals by fusing their parts together. So this will be an exercise in design element combination, I guess, if that's the term. And it'll be a challenge to come up with a unique pose and then incorporate all the aspects of each animal into the final design while drawing it in sprite form. It's probably more ambitious for some of the other stuff I've attempted, but that's the whole point of experimentation, to try something new. So what I'll do is, on my main screen here, I've got the randomizer pulled up. Once I actually pull the randomized data, I'll pull this off to the other screen and I'll slide it over for reference if I need to. So let's see. I have no idea what this thing is going to spit out, so I will click on rerun. And what it's given us is a hamster and a lion. Hamster and lion, huh? Okay. Oh, let's see what we can do. I will put this over here on the other screen. I'll go back here to our main window. Clear off the canvas. This kind of goofy red ball thing is a lot more compelling than I thought it'd be for something I just drew in a minute. Okay. let's see. So we want hamster and lion. Obviously, the biggest thing to note here is the size discrepancy between these two. We have a tiny hamster, as the picture showed, just sitting in someone's hand, and then a massive lion. I think it would be in our best interest to choose a size to go with and then choose the size of one and then incorporate the details from the other. So I think it would be pretty funny and a good contrast to go for a small hamster-sized creature that has lion-type features. So let's see. Hamsters have sort of a short body, and what I'll do is I'll sort of rough in primaries on layers here until I get the intended shape that I want. I know I'm not really a biologist by any means, but for hamsters, they have sort of a rounded body. If I take the pose that the person had in that picture, they have these little arms, kind of little squat legs, and if I remember correctly, they have little feet. I don't know how many toes they have. For the sake of our experiment here, we'll keep the primary kind of rough and see. Part of the challenge for doing these at the pixel level, because of the nature of the way the brush tools work, you get a lot of these really blocky lines. And like I mentioned before, part of the cleanup involves going in and deleting things out at the pixel level to make everything less redundant. This is sort of a stylistic choice, I guess. I know I've seen some other people who do black outline sprites, and they don't go for sort of a single stroke thickness on their outlines, but I found it helps overall clean up the design and make it a little bit less cluttered. But for the purposes of what we're doing here, we're going to just get the basic outline and then we'll start working on the specific details. Looking at the original randomizer results, the hamsters have kind of big ears, these big triangular looking ears. And at some point we're going to need to be able to save some room for the lion type features. And lions, so I'll sort of give myself kind of a reference off to the side. Lion's face from that picture, it's got kind of a triangular nose, the feline mouth, round head. That was a male lion, so it's got the mane. That is I guess the ears are over here somewhere. That is my 2-second terrible lion. But the facial features are a little bit different from the hamster, and both animals have a lot of whiskers. The lion's ones are down here like this. The hamster ones are over here, kind of like that. I'll have to figure out how I want to incorporate the whiskers at some point. But going back to the original primary, the mane is going to have to be somewhere around here, I think. I could go for kind of a Jurassic Park Dilophosaur look and have a giant kind of frill of fur going around, which could look funny. If I did that, I wonder if I have the ability to give this thing a bit more of a neck to sort of give myself room. Looking at the picture, hamsters don't really have much of a neck. They have sort of a squished, round, bean-shaped body. But I think I can probably get away with moving the head up a little bit and then giving myself room to put the neck and whatnot all the way around here. Maybe what we could do, put this on the layer so I don't screw up my primary. Let's see, the ears are here. What if we did something like this? And put the mane all the way around. It'll look like this bizarre hamster has an umbrella around its head. That could look interesting. And I think for now, what I'll do is kind of set myself some boundaries on where I want everything to be. Part of the primary phase is giving yourself a place to start. And then kind of firming up the details as you go. Let me get these ears sort of evened out. We're looking at this thing from a 3/4 perspective going this way, so that's a rough approximation of the center line on the face. So what we'll do is start cleaning up the outline around the face, and then as we go, kind of clean the details up. This will be probably the more tedious part of the whole process, because there's not a whole lot to talk through as I go in and start deleting out the different sections. I want to make sure and keep the shape of the ears roughly the same. These are somewhat triangular. They're going to be bigger than, I think, a lion's ears by default. I do like the pose here that has the creature with its kind of paws together like this. The source image had the hamster holding what looked like a carrot or a little piece of food. It's whatever it was orange, and it was holding that in its paws. I think that would be a good pose here. The rest of the body, keep the legs sort of round like that. It's sitting on its haunches again. A hamster has kind of a compressed body. So right away, this particular fusion is going to have the hamster's body shape. And I think in order to sort of stay with the whole idea of incorporating design elements from both animals, what I'll have to do is adapt a lot of the other details that I put on here to match the attributes of the lion, so it doesn't just look like a hamster that's wearing a lion costume. I think the limbs, or at least the extremities, like the hands and feet, will probably be a good chance to do that. The original image, the hamster's paws sort of start down here, and let's see if I can describe this. It has sort of like cuffs almost. The fur is over here, and then the fur sort of ends, and then the paws are a little bit lighter. What I've done here sort of roughly, this will probably be easier to do once I get to the shading. I've giving it the same sort of cuffs, and you have the paw section here, and here's the arms. For the feet, I have to think, what do cat paws look like? They're sort of round like this. They have retractable claws, so I can give this thing sort of rounded paws without giving it actual claws. If I wanted to, I can give it claws. I think that might make it a little bit too busy considering the paws aren't very big. And if we add in the inner ear, I don't know what that's called from a veterinary term, but whatever this inner ear section is here. And then do the same thing on the other side. The ears are sort of cocked forward so that you can see the inner part on both sides. Trying to figure out the mouth here. If I want to put that sort of inverted Y shape for the mouth. Well, that's not bad. The eyes, I think, are okay. I'm trying to keep this thing somewhat centered. A good thing to incorporate from the lion aspect. I'm totally procrastinating on the mane, by the way. I'm trying to think of how I want to do that here without making it a little too disruptive. But in the meantime, I believe lion tails. I should probably just Google it. Make sure I'm being accurate here. And if I go over to Google and just image search a lion. What do their tails look like? They have sort of long tails with like a little fluffy thing at the end, right? Okay, real quick, for reference purposes, they have kind of a long tail with a little fluffy thing, whatever you call that, at the end. So I think that would be a good idea for our lion hamster. Regular hamsters that only have, I'm trying to think back, I've never owned a hamster, so my hamster worldly experience is Google images and possibly one episode of Hamtaro. Don't they have little like fluffy tails, just like little tiny tails? I don't know, someone who's watching this that actually knows animals could probably tell me. But for the sake of what we're doing here, stay on model with the lion. This sort of thin tail with the fluffy thing on the end would be the on-model reference for lion, at least a generic lion. Let's see, I want to create some variation to show the tufts of fur. And now we'll just have to clean up the extra pixels around the edges. And that should be good for the tail. Now, I guess we can look at doing whiskers too. I don't want to do this. I want to do single strokes. Don't want them to be too distracting. I also don't want it to look like this thing has a a multi-stranded Fu Manchu. Let's stick with that for now. I get the feeling the mane is going to complicate that part, but I'll worry about that in a sec. The tail, let's make sure I've got everything sort of cleaned up. Trying to get the sort of bristly edges on the tail. There, that's better. I may have to go back and clean that up a little bit more too. Okay. Now on to the main event. I'll do this on another layer for now. I won't mess up the primary here. Lions' manes, they typically billow outwards from above the head. Go back to my Google image search here. Yeah, looks, the stereotypical lion's mane sort of has like a middle part, and then it billows down like this and sort of frames the face. Looks like in some pictures, depending on how big the mane is, some of the mane goes all the way down the front of the chest, and for some of them it's sort of more like a collar piece. Let's see. This is going to be really messy until I get this figured out. Not a bad first cut here. I think these whiskers are gonna have to go for now. They're sort of screwing with my line of sight. I will get the mane in place first, and then I'll figure the whiskers out. I could put them a little bit further up the face, but on both the hamster and the lion, the whiskers frame the sort of nose area. They're right around here. So it's going to come down to what's the cleanest. And I think as far as design elements go, getting the mane right is more important to me than the whiskers. I would be okay leaving them off, depending. So what we have here, let's see. Part of the challenge of working things at the pixel level like this is the amount of detail that you can get really depends on how specific the thing you're drawing, which is a good challenge when it comes to trying to draw something specific. If that makes any sort of sense. Because I'm working with lines, I can't just draw things like I would with a brush. But what I'm doing here is I'm going all the way around the face, trying to clean up the specific lines. This is a stray whisker here. And getting more of a circular shape. Looks like the shape of the mane, while billowy, is it sort of maintains that round shape, interestingly enough. The real challenge is going to be conveying that into sprite form. And thankfully, because I have the ability to work in layers, I guess to sort of explain Photoshop interface, just in case you're watching this and have never used Photoshop before, being able to work on layers is one of the most powerful tools within Photoshop. And if you look over here on the side, this is a brief aside to explain what I'm talking about. the main canvas I'm working on with our lion hamster is here. I created another layer above it for the main to give me a separate place to work. And the handy thing about this is I can make all sorts of changes and alter this layer without affecting the one below it. If I was doing this kind of like a painting on a canvas, I'm only working on one surface. I can't do something like this, which is part of why I like digital tools so much. But I can take the layer, I can move it around, I can delete things, I can flip it, I can do all this stuff, and because it's on a separate layer, it won't affect the baseline below it. It's just it's kind of an innate thing that you learn once you're working with Photoshop, and it took me a bit in the beginning to sort of get my head around it, but once I learned the layer function and how to use it, it made things very easy when it comes to working with something that has a lot of moving parts. Back down to the lower part of the main. I think the shape is kind of coming together. I think I need to move this out of frame so I can get the outline cleaned up on the bottom. What I will do is I will make some edits here, and then I'm going to move this thing back into place on the head. I think the part around the chin is going to be challenging. I think the shape is okay, but I kind of want this thing to billow out in the same direction. As we see on the right side here, I have the strands of hair going kind of outwards, and I'm trying to see if I can duplicate that on the left side without having it be too distracting. That's a little bit better. Let's see, this part goes up to sort of match. And it's pretty good rough shape for the main. I kind of expected that to be a bit more difficult as far as going in and getting something this obviously large around the rest of the head and body. But overall, overall I think that works. What I will do is I will merge these down, put them on the same layer, and start cleaning up the sections around it and kind of blend this whole thing into the original design. So now we're on the same layer. All this stuff is in the same spot. All I have to do is clean up the sections from the body. This is all a holdover from the original layer. And I think that's gonna do it for the main. I guess this particular section should go up a bit more to match the other side. Now let's go back to the idea of the whiskers. Question is, can I get whiskers on this other side Sorry, I'm covering my mouth with my hand as I'm talking. Let's see. I think the whiskers on the side closest to us look okay. But these ones on this side are being a little problematic. Okay. That might have to do. Pretty subtle, and it'd be easy to miss. But I think if I shade this correctly, it'll look alright. Okay. Let's take a look at where we're at with the outline for our lion hamster. We call that Lamster. I think that makes more sense than trying to go the other way. Lamster. Limester? I'll have to think about that. I will deal with the naming of these sprites in post-production when I put them up. Okay. I guess the only other thing to do here is go through and see if there's any more sections that need to be cleaned up. And then we will finally move on to the color paletting. And from here the whole process is going to go a lot faster. The color assignment and the shading, it doesn't take nearly as long as the initial line work, thankfully. But what we will do, I'm going to have to pull up my source here. Looking at the reference, the hamster is sort of a light gray. Aside from its little paws, the color patterning is pretty consistent. It's just sort of light gray with some darker browns. The lion is almost completely brown with some highlights on its face for the white. And it looks like the hamster sort of has that around the mouth too. I think what I will do is try and go for a base palette and then go for a secondary color contrast. I'm trying to think out loud here. For the main color will be from one animal, and then I will use the color scheme in the other animal as the contrasting highlights. So if we create a new layer for our colors, we can experiment around with this and see. Using the paint bucket tool will allow us to go in here and tinker around with the color palette. I'm using my mouse for this since it's a little bit faster. If we go for the hamster's base color palette and go gray on the body and the head, and I'll have to go in and add the pink to the inner ear sections separately. What we could do is a lighter tan brown for the paws and the mane and the tail tuft. And the hamster eyes are solid black. They look like little marbles. The lion's eyes are more deep yellow, like a cat's eye. What we could do, let me see if I can get a closer shot. Having looked at a lot of eyes, because as a slight aside for my papier-mâché stuff and the sculptural work, I use glass taxidermy eyes that I buy online, and large predatory cat eyes are one thing that I've used a lot. I'm a little bit familiar with how they look. Unlike house cat eyes that have the kind of narrow pupil, lion eyes are round, and the inner pupil is very small, but it's also round. So if we go back to our Lamster, we could go for a light yellow base color for the eye, and then a dark pupil, single pixel pupil. It's not entirely round, so doing a single pupil looks incredibly unsettling. Let's not do that. If we do something like this for the eye, and then that'll leave us enough room around in the iris to shade and get the colors, and then put some highlights. I think this works for the base color palette. I will go in and start doing the inner ear and then the white sections around the mouth. Let's see, going back to the original reference. Kind of a light pink in here. And what we'll do is we'll shade the inner parts of the ear to give it some texture. For the face, the white is sort of right around the mouth area, and it's blended. I want to make sure I don't make it too abrupt. Looks like it's all the way around the mouth area. We're working in kind of a small space, so I'm somewhat limited to how much of a blending effect I can get. That's not a bad start. I wonder if adding another pixel there will help. I think that will do for now. We'll go ahead and save this version of Photoshop. With this particular build has been fine, but in the past it's had issues crashing. I'm kind of got in the habit of making sure I save my work periodically. So the last thing I want to do is lose all the work. Okay, moving on. Let's set up another layer for the shading. Looking at this here, real quick to explain some commands I'm going to be using here. This layer that I've created above the base color palette down here is going to be specifically for the shading. If I right click and go up to this command that says create clipping mask, what this does is it sets a restriction on the property of the layer that causes it to only draw on whatever exists below it. For example, when I do the shading on here, because I don't want my shading to essentially go outside the lines of the color that I've created, that clipping mask allows me to only color on what's below. You can see even though I'm going all over the place, it's only putting the color on the colored sections of the palette, the main color palette below. It's pretty handy, and it saves you a step as far as having to, trim off all of your extra color. Now what we'll do is we'll go in and set a slightly darker gray tone for our Lamster's main body here. We'll see. I think that's pretty good color contrast. The light source, I guess, would be coming from this direction. What we'll do is we'll go in and add some some shade depth to all the relevant bits here. I will go in and do all of the gray sections first, and then I'll go in and do the white and the pink on the head afterwards. Add in some shading underneath here. This shadow is coming from the mane, going all the way around. The hands. Go ahead and add in a pretty generous amount of shadow for the stomach and then the legs. Move over to the tail. Quick, this section here is bothering me. Back to getting a little bit of shadow on the upper and lower section of the tail. I think that will do it for the base color palette, the gray. We'll go back to the face, add in some shading around the mouth, a little darker. Actually, that might be too dark. I don't want it to blend in with the rest of the face. I'll go ahead and do that. I don't want it to be too close to this color, otherwise it'll sort of get lost. We'll do the ears. Adding in some shadowing along the top to show the depth. And go on to the tan sections. This is going to be a little bit challenging. Make sure I'm getting a good shading effect on the fur, while also keeping in mind its position to the rest of the head and body. There's going to be a little bit of shadow coming from the head, since the mane itself is sort of floofing out from underneath and around the head. I guess we can sort of create some illusions of kind of the hair strands here, and that'll probably work as an okay effect. I'm not really too concerned with the specifics, as long as it doesn't distract from the overall design. And then we can sort of clean up the sections around here. And see how that looks. Sort of one thing that's good to do when you're working on a design or any sort of drawing is to zoom out or change your perspective and see kind of how the design looks from a different angle. It's a good way to catch mistakes. If we move down to the paws and add just a little bit of shading around the fingers for the toes, keeping in mind that the toes are sort of tucked underneath the legs. go ahead over here. Add some shading to the tail tuft. Sort of give the illusion of the fur texture, just like I did on the mane. Let's see. Looking at the face real quick. I wonder if that would look better. Can't decide if I like that kind of more narrow mouth. And I think the way it looks now is a little bit better. And then we'll move in to the eye. Just add a little bit shading around the eye. Highlight. And I think we are about done. We'll go through here and do sort of a last bit of cleanup on the shading. Mostly even out and make sure the direction of the shading doesn't look too out of place. And kind of zoom out here. The finished product. Let me drop this into a folder so I can move it around, move all the layers around at once. Should do it. There we go. And I think this is our finished Lamster. The head was a little bit of a challenge. This thing sort of looks a little bit chihuahua-ish, but that's okay. The base color palette with the hamsters, lighter fur, I think contrasts alright with the lion's tan mane, and the hands and feet and the tail tuft sort of reflect that a little bit. Overall, not too bad. See, what I can do is save this. I guess we can try another one. Even with all of my rambling at the beginning as sort of the intro, this one still took about an hour. So I think if we go ahead and move on to another one, probably won't need to spend as much time on the intro to the design process and we sort of jump right in. So let's do that.